It is 1925. In Rome, a hunchbacked man rises to speak in Parliament. He weighs barely 100 pounds. His voice is weak. Mussolini sits across the chamber, heckling. The little man ignores him. "You fascists," he says. "Your ruling class is corrupt. You have impoverished the workers and the peasants alike." He is tearing apart the logic of fascism to the fascists themselves. Within a year, they will lock him in a cage for the rest of his life.
Il bersagliere a 100 penne e l'alpino ne ha una sola, il partigiano ne ha nessuna e sta sui monti a guerreggiare. Il partigiano ne ha nessuna e sta sui monti a guerreggiare.
I could listen to the whole thing. It's such a beautiful tune, song, ballad. It is from the late 30s throughout the 40s, an Italian partisan song. And they're all so beautiful. It's very difficult to find something that goes with that cold opening. Now, I'm not going to tell you who that was.
You're intriguing me, Randy.
I'm not going to tell you who
You're
that person
me.
was. But he's very relevant today, that individual. Not a household name, but I got to tell you something. I when I knew I was going to talk about it this week, I've spent the last 4 days. I got 50 pages of notes in front of me. Look at this, Reggie. I mean, they're all over the place. I'm not going to get to any because someone that's an expert on this individual, the historian, the philosopher, the economist, Dr. Richard Wolff, who's here, knows all about him. And like I said, very relevant. Reggie, you would agree that this gentleman and his work, his lifetime is just amazing, folks. So we're going to play this other partisan song that took place and come back with Richard Wolff. This is this is by, and the partisan songs were communist, socialist, anarcho-syndicalist, a lot of different factions there to the left that fought against Mussolini, but the music was all great, and maybe Richard will explain why. Maybe it has something to do with opera, the tradition. All right, so that La Bad Day, whatever it's called. You got it? Yeah. Okay, we'll be right back with the one and only Dr. Richard Wolff.
O Badoglio, Pietro Badoglio, ingrassato dal fascio littorio, col tuo degno compare Vittorio, ci hai già rotto abbastanza i coglion. Tlas mai dit parei, tlas mai fight parei, tlas mai dit, tlas mai fight, tlas mai dit parei, tlas mai di lussissi, tlas mai falu, nonno, tutto questo salvarti non può. Ti ricordi quando eri fascista e facevi il saluto romano o dal duce stringevi la mano? Sei davvero un gran bel portale.
All right. I can't pronounce the name of that song because it's misspelled. I misspelled it on the file. Dr. Richard Wolff, you missed, I think you came in just after the cold opening. We had a narrator talk about a young man who stood before Mussolini in 1925 when he was in Parliament, his one term in Parliament, and he was later jailed and died in prison. And I said that this is an extraordinary individual who is relevant and germane. Would you agree with that before you say who it was?
Absolutely. I can't think of a person more deserving of those adjectives you just used.
Yeah. All right. So go ahead and tell us who. And first of all, let me ask you about the music. And he inspired a lot of that music. The music that the partisans came up with. It was very difficult. I found hundreds of them, and difficult. And is it does it go back to opera? The melodies. I mean, we know. Go ahead.
Anything that's musical that has to do with Italy. immediately brings up the opera. The Italian culture, more than any other, developed around a spectacular coming together of the arts. You know, it's something that you can see in the spectacular painting, in the explosion of the Renaissance and all that it meant in Italy. But you know, think about an opera this way. If you go to the opera, you get number one, spectacular music, but you also get a story. There are actors and actresses up on the stage delivering to you not only music, like a singer might, like a quartet might, like an orchestra might, but you're seeing something else. You're seeing actors trying to articulate in their facial expressions, in their body movements, the feelings and the meaning of the music that they're conveying and of the libretto, of the story that they're telling. But we're still not done. Opera is also, and has long been, very concerned with the visual spectacle. If you have an opportunity, and to be honest, I also mean if you have the money, here at Lincoln Center, wildly overpriced. It is a scandal that opera costs as much in this country, if you can even find it where you are, as it does. But what that money pays for in part is a spectacular scene presentation. I mean, you've never seen the pyrotechnics, the high technology in which the stage sets are moved around. And all of this is coordinated. So there's a complicated linkage between the music and the story and the setting and the acting. It's almost like, think of having the richest meal you've ever had, where a chef went completely beyond what he or she could normally do and really showed you what skills they had accumulated over their lifetime to put together a meal you'll never forget. Right. Well, an opera is that kind of commitment to multiple layers of artistry presented to you all at once. And of course,
it had an impact. I mean, that tradition, that history would have, because these songs were developed in the late 30s and the early 40s, and I guess these brigades, like there's the Garibaldi Brigata, that would sit around when they're out there in the mountains, and one of the ways they'd entertain each other would be singing these songs.
Absolutely. And once the operas developed, the operas were often based on just those songs. Yeah. If you listen to opera, you can hear that distinctive Neapolitan song style, right, or the Roman style, or the Florence style, and so on. And then, of course, the opera reacts back and shapes the singing in a dialectic back and forth that makes the special music. And the man we're talking about, Antonio Gramsci,
he was a theater critic. Go ahead.
He began as a person committed to the theater and music and poetry and literature. These were the areas that drew him. He was taken with all of that. But like many of the greatest artists, more in the past than nowadays, sad for us, it was normal and natural and frequent that if there was injustice, the artist, sooner or later, trying to capture how the world really is, comes face to face with the injustice. And what then happens is that many of them become politically active, fighters for a better world, because their artistry helped them to see the injustice of the world in which they lived. And so Antonio Gramsci goes from a theater critic and a literary person to become the head of the Communist Party of Italy for many, many years, during which
16 years to be
grew
exact.
it
Yeah.
from a new small party. He was there at the beginning, a new small party, into the second most important political party in Italy, which it was in the 1950s and 60s. So
Right.
it's
He was well dead at that time, but he was at it at the very beginning when they split from the Socialist Party in 1921, and they developed their own party.
and all the great leaders of the Italian Communist Party, and indeed all the great figures of Italian culture, they all, even to this day, will tell you of the importance of Antonio Gramsci.
Right.
If you go to Rome, there's a Gramsci Institute. There's an international association to study and develop his work. They put on conferences all over the world. There's an enormous number of academic researchers who work on Gramsci to this day and write books and articles. If you go to the library, if you want to download, you will see that Gramsci is an enormous influence on today.
Right. I want to bring him in before I do. The reason why I want to focus on Gramsci today is because I can see a line between what's happening in Minneapolis, what's happening with all of these adventures, these wars of choice, and all the other organs of repression that are developing right now. And Gramsci is definitely one that figured it out back then. But let's go back to his child. He grew up in Sardinia. He was really, I have a bad back. I have a curved, spine, but he had one where he was like Quasimodo. It was like a really bad problem. He was like 5 foot tall, weighed 100 pounds, and he's in this dirt poor island, Sardinia, and he saw the poverty there, and then he was a smart guy, and he moves to Turin, and let's take it there when he goes to Turin in 1911, and how he develops there, and what he sees, what's going on in Turin and Genoa, and what's the other, in Milan. It was like a very heavy industrialized area, that triangle. All right, so take it from there.
Yeah, as a young man, he does what smart young men, if they have half a chance, do if they come from those islands, of which, Sardinia is one, Corsica is another, Crete is still another, although that's Greek, and so on. They try to get out. They try to go to where there is schooling, to where there is culture, to where there is education for them, to try to have a life that's not the life of a very, very poor peasant in a very, very poor agricultural area, which is where Gramsci came from. And he was lucky. He got out. He went to Torino. That's an industrial city in the north of Italy, about as far away from Sardinia as you can get and still be in Italy. Went to school, went to the university, got a first-rate education, in part because he was a very diligent student.
But wait a second, he did not like what he learned in school, right?
No,
he felt it was like encyclopedic kind of information jammed down your head. What was his beef with the education system?
Well, he understood what it has always been, which is an area precisely because it's important, precisely because education gives you the tools, reading, writing, mathematics, with which to understand the world. It very quickly becomes clear to whoever the ruling classes of a society are that they better control the education system for fear that it will be the place where people learn enough to see through the ruling class and then to become enemies of it. And so what happens in every society, including the United States right now, is that the rich try to control what goes on in the university. And one of the ways you do that is you make universities depend on rich people for money. I went to Harvard as a student, and then I went to Stanford and Yale. So I'm like a poster boy for elite education. But one of the things I learned in all three institutions was their total dependence on money. They were constantly struggling, all of the professors, but even more the administrators, on keeping the money that was coming in, finding new sources of money, running to Washington to beg the government for money, running to every major corporation they could get a hold of, endlessly talking to their alumni. I mean, I must get a fundraiser from these three institutions every 3 or 4 weeks. Something comes to my home, and that's been true for the last 50 years. You know, this is a money-making operation, and they do not want students or faculty to do anything that might interfere with the money. We saw that over the last 2 or 3 years when students stood up and opposed what Israel is doing in Gaza. And look what happened to them. Universities like Harvard or Yale, and particularly Columbia in New York, abusively deprived these students of the freedom of speech, of expressing themselves. What an irony that a university shut down what they were saying they had learned in the university to see in what Israel was doing. But and why? We all know why. Because rich people didn't like what those students had to say and threatened them by going to the university and saying, we'll cut off the money. Okay, that's why students often react badly to this kind of limit that is imposed in most universities and colleges.
Right.
And they leave the university with a bad feeling.
Right.
Gramsci was smart enough to understand you can have that bad feeling. You can see the corruption that is at the core of universities. But you still can learn a lot if you use your brain, if you go to the library, if you make sure to ask who are the critical thinkers that have something to say on whatever you're interested in. You can make the university work for you, but you got to do the extra work.
Right. So this is in 2011. He graduates, and and he's 1911, and he comes out and he sees the conditions, and I got to tell you, that area was on fire. In terms of the business that the Fiat and Alfa Romeo in Milan and the steel industry.
It was above all, yes. It's above all to understand. Italy was a little bit later to the Industrial Revolution than, say, England or France or Germany. But when industrialization came, it grew very, very fast.
Right.
And
they couldn't turn out enough cars. They actually couldn't. Alfa Romeo.
The cities in the north of Italy, particularly.
Right.
Turin, Milan, Genoa, these and others too.
Right.
Bologna, but highly concentrated, very fast. People were yanked off the countryside, which was often in trouble and poor, to get these jobs in the factories that were exploding like mushrooms after the rain in these northern cities. But the cities weren't prepared. So the workers had to live in slums, in awful conditions, and the capitalists were in a great position, all of these people coming off the countryside, desperate for jobs. You could get away with paying them too little, and the cities weren't prepared to handle them. So you had a working class that was thrown together in huge factories, bitterly aware of being ripped off. And here he came with his message, if we stick together, we can make this much better for us. and he was extremely successful.
Right. He started his own paper, The Cry of the People, but before that, he wrote for Avante, and wrote theater reviews, but he looked at it in a different way when he looked at the what was happening, not just on the stage, but he'd look at the reaction of the audience and see that. And I'm not talking about opera, but it was all rich people that would go, and he would do the reviews, and he would see the kind of influence it would have on individuals and their response, rich people's response. One in particular, Ibsen's A Doll's House. There were, I forgot the name of the woman in there, in the way the main character, and there were people in the audience like, oh, I couldn't stand the person. He would look at things like that, little permutations, and he figured out that was another pillar of society, the way theater was presented. And I'm talking about opera so much. And so he does that, and then he writes for The Cry of the People. He starts his own paper, and he gets very buried in the PSI, the Italian Socialist Party. And at that point, in 1914, they were opposed to the war. And guess who's on the executive committee at that time? Mussolini, who was named after Benito Juarez. His father was a communist. And he was a diehard socialist at that time. He's part of that same party, but they were hardcore against entering that war. And they didn't enter it in 1914. They did it in 1915. And Mussolini he got kicked out of the party because he supported the war. We later find out that Mussolini was getting money from the French government and other bribes to take that stance. He was an opportunist. So now tell me about the split in the Communist Party, Socialist Party at that time, and Gramsci's role in it.
Well, what happened after during the war? Remember, the World War I starts in 1914 and basically runs until 1918.
Yes.
And in the middle of that period, right, is the Russian Revolution, dated 1917. And when the workers and the soldiers and the peasants of Russia rose up and made their revolution, remember they had made an earlier one in 1905. They had learned many lessons about what to do and what not to do. Their leadership was better, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, and the others. And they made their revolution, and they succeeded in October and November of 1917. And overthrew hundreds of years of a czarist regime that overthrown, replaced it not only with a republic, but basically with a socialist republic. They were able to, as a Russian Socialist Party, which, by the way, they were. They called themselves the Russian Socialist Workers' Party, or named very close to that. And they were connected to the socialist parties at that time that existed all over Western Europe, existed in the United States as well. But when they made their revolution, they took a number of extraordinary steps. The first one, they declared this is a war among competing imperialists who are fighting over who gets what piece of Africa or Asia or Latin America. That's not what workers are concerned about. Our problem is capitalism, not who's got what piece of it. And we're not going to fight and die shooting and killing other working class people just like us in another country in order to help decide which capitalists rule the roost. So we're out. By the way, he wasn't the only one. Eugene Victor Debs in the United States, the head of the Socialist Party here, took the same position and urged American young people not to fight in the war. And he was put in prison because he did that.
Same thing with Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht.
And in Russia, the key leader of the Socialist Party who took that same position was Vladimir Lenin. So what was going on was that every socialist was confronted in every country by the fact that other socialists were saying, don't fight in the war. But your own country was telling you it was your obligation as a good German, if you were in Germany, or a good French person, if you were in France, to fight with your country against others. And it was a moment of enormous conflict inside the socialist parties between those who wanted to have nothing to do with the war and those who felt they had to support it. Right. And it was crucial because socialists had won many seats in the parliaments of Europe. In Germany, they were the number 2 political party in terms of the seats in their government. And they were important everywhere else, too, including in Italy.
Right.
Well, long story short, what happened was they couldn't resolve their differences. The governments intervened, arrested, imprisoned, and sometimes worse, those socialists who were against participation, while allowing the other socialists freedom, not being arrested, let them function. That, of course, made the conflict bitterer than it might otherwise have been. And the long story short, the Socialist Party split. And they split over the question of the war, and then they split because one Socialist Party, during the war, had been able to take power in its country, to go beyond being an important political party, to overthrow the old regime and establish a new socialist government. And that was, of course, Russia.
Right.
So the socialists split because those socialists who liked that said, we must now support Russia. We must do everything we can to get the Germans, if we're a German socialist, or the French government, if we're a French socialist, or the Italian government, if we're an Italian socialist, to be at least not an enemy of this new regime in Russia. Other socialists said, no, we don't like the way the Russians made their revolution. They were too violent, or they were too this or that, whatever it was, or they were the kind of people who supported their government in the war anyway. And they said, no, we're not going to be supportive of Russia.
Right.
At that point, the split took the form of changing the name. Those socialists who had not participated in the war and argued against it, and who supported the new socialist government in Russia, led by Lenin, changed their name from socialist to communist.
Right.
That's when communist parties everywhere began.
Well, not in Italy. Italy didn't start until after 1921, to be honest with you.
It varied.
Yeah,
Some countries did it as early as 1918, 19. Others waited till 2021. That depended on the particulars of each country, their history, their politics, and all the rest of it. But it's all in those few years, right at the end and immediately after World War I, that the split in the left occurred that has ever since been the split between socialist parties on the one hand and communist parties on the other.
All right, so that takes me, I'm going to jump up here to 1919, because the situation in Italy is very similar to what was going on in Germany after the war. You had a lot of, you had all these soldiers returning, and unemployment mushroomed, but you still had the industry going on in Turin, and they were making cars and they were whatever they were doing, but they cut the wages, and they brought a lot of people in from the South, which was very poor agriculturally. They were agricultural workers. Many of them didn't even speak Italian, that were dragged into the workforce. But in the workforce, they formed these councils, these committees, and And Gramsci was, he not only was he a brilliant writer and a brilliant theorist, he also was an incredible activist and organizer. So now he gets involved in these massive strikes that have taken place. One that, particularly later on after 1919. The one at Fiat. So let's walk us through that period of time. The one in Germany was suppressed by the army. They made a pact with Ebert and the Social Democrats to suppress Rosa Luxemburg and all of those people. But then in Italy it was a little different. Can you walk us through these plants and these factories where there were these the workers occupied. They were producing, but they had no one to sell to and they couldn't get credit. Can you take us through that period of time in Turin?
Gramsci arrives into a situation of extreme exploitation of the workers. These are workers now, many of whom are related to people who got hurt or killed in the war. They are aware that it was the ruling class of Italy that brought Italy into that war and was trying to make money out of it. In Turin, in that city, the overwhelmingly dominant employer was the Fiat automobile company, one of the giants of Italian industry then and ever since, right up to the present. In the same way that Ford and GM have been very important for over the last century, et cetera, et cetera. The opportunity that Gramsci saw was that these workers, if you could get them together to talk about what was happening to them, the war, the bad wages, the underdeveloped city, the injustice, the rich people around them when they had trouble eating enough. If you could get them together, talking to each other, so they understood that the problems each of them had was not unique to them as an individual, but was something that was a social problem. It's a little bit like the lame efforts of the Democratic Party in the United States to get people to understand the problem isn't your job, your salary, your wage. It's something more general, which they've called affordability. Well, that's a very vague term. You should be able to do a lot better than that, but we don't expect much from the Democratic Party, and they live up to what we expect. But it wasn't that way with Mr. Gramsci. So he looked around, what is a model? How could he get workers together to talk about their issues and to do it in a way where folks who were advanced in their thinking, people like Gramsci himself, people that Gramsci had been able to reach and teach, could talk to them in those groups and shape their conversations so they would finally talk to each other about what their real problems were.
Hey, can I just interrupt for 1 second? He did it in a Socratic way. It wasn't like he was talking down to him. He did in those dialogues of Plato, he would ask questions, right?
That's right. He was a very good teacher. He had a deep sympathy for the people he was talking to. He was one of them. He came from a rural backwater, which is where most of them came from sooner or later. He was part of it, and he understood instinctually the way you do if you're talking to people whose history is not all that different from your own. But he took a model from another country. He took a model from Russia. He deeply admired, as he said over and over again, the Russian Revolution. He was one of those who quit the Socialist Party to help form the Communist Party of Italy, which he later led for many years.
Right.
So he said the Russians figured something out, how to get workers together. He even said that they were able to bring the workers together with the returning soldiers, because the new communist government in Russia withdrew from World War I. Having opposed it, they were not going to continue to fight it. The slogan that the Communist Party, this new party in Russia, used to consolidate its position was a slogan: we have three things we're going to deliver: bread, peace, and land. We were going to give to the people without land for the first time in Russian history, and we were going to be peace by withdrawing from World War I, and we're going to distribute food to everybody who needs it. All of which they did, which is why they survived. Right. Anyway,
going back to the occupation.
What he admired most was the Russian revolutionaries.
Right.
Lenin and his associates bringing workers together with soldiers, but also together with one another.
Right.
And that institution, these councils, these meetings, regular of workers, in a Russian language, the word is Soviet. That's why it's called the Soviet Union. And Soviet in Russian is what the Italians meant when they used the different phrase workers' councils. They set up workers' councils in every Fiat workshop, in every Fiat factory. They brought the workers together. They mobilized them. They educated them. And when the strikes happened, they graduated from particular strike of particular workplace into a general strike. All the workers go out, will refuse to work. In that moment, Gramsci teaches the workers one of the most important lessons any worker can learn. If you withhold your labor, there is no profit for the capitalist. It's not the capitalist that causes the profit to show up. It's you, the worker. You produce the profit which the capitalist uses to repress you, to supervise you, to dominate you, and to make the system work for them and not for you. But you're the one who makes it possible, so that if you withdraw your labor, the whole system stops. Right. You can make the revolution. The Russians did it. You can do it.
Well, wait, Richard. So, just getting back to this, they actually occupied, and they had people with red flags, and they were singing the International on the inside, and they were producing cars, and they did a lockout of the owners.
Oh, by the way, Americans might enjoy the fact that workers staying in strikes had been up until then. The workers don't show up. They don't come. They don't go to their machine. They don't function. They stay home. This was a new idea. This was, there'd been some examples before, but he became famous for saying, no, go in. Let us demonstrate that not only do we not like the capitalists, we don't need them. We can run the factory. We know exactly how it works. We can fix the machines. We're already doing that. The capitalist never comes in. His hands won't get dirty. He has no oil on his shirt. We do the work. And if we withhold it, we can call the shots, because without us, nothing happens. So, they took over. By the way, Americans will understand this, because the same thing happened in Detroit, in the auto factories of the United States, some years later, instead of in the early part of the 20th century, a little later, in the 1930s. And when workers said, we're coming to work, we're going to occupy the factory, we're not going to let you in, capitalist, we'll stay there, we'll either work or we won't, that's our decision, you're not in charge anymore. The name in America that was given to that was a sit-in. And right. the workers sitting in the factory was then picked up by African Americans in the United States later on, just like Gramsci borrowed that idea and that tactic from the Russians. American civil rights leaders and activists borrowed it from Mr. Gramsci and the Russians, and used it very effectively as a tactic to get at least some civil rights for at least a little while in the United States.
Right. This is during the period. It's called the Bonino Rosso, the red period, or the red whatever that is, 2-year period, or 2-year period, and then it was followed by the black period, 2-year period, and you had Mussolini and all that. So the strike, they have it going. But they couldn't get the credit. All right, they were actually producing cars, but they couldn't get the credit. They couldn't get the raw material. So it turned out it was like a reverse siege. You know what I mean? They're in there, and you got whatever. And then it's
interrupt, Randy.
What?
The important thing here is that Gramsci's worker council tactic was successful. He brought the workers out. He gave them an education. He gave them a militancy that terrified the owners and operators of Fiat and every other capitalist.
Right. Lancia and
they saw what they said to the media was, it doesn't matter, we don't care about it. The truth of it, which is usually the way. When the government says it doesn't care, it's not bothered, is when they're bothered the most.
Right. Right. Well, wait a second. They marched out when they couldn't get the credit. And they actually marched out without a single person being shot. They marched out of there. But
they were well disciplined. He had done his job.
Right.
Well, the ruling class of Italy went crazy.
Right.
It went crazy. They realized suddenly that what had happened in Russia could happen in Italy too. And in fact, there were efforts, I think you and I have talked about this, there were efforts in other parts of Europe to replicate what Russia had done. For example, a guy named Eisner did it in Bavaria, of all places, in Munich, and took over the government with his allies and declared the Bavarian Soviet Socialist Republic. Another group did it in Hamburg. Another group did it in Berlin. So they were aware in Italy that this was happening everywhere, and they were terrified that it could happen to them. That's when they went to work mobilizing banks to give no credit to these institutions because the workers had taken them over, for police forces to hassle them, and they went into the Socialist Party trying to win over everybody who was less radical than Gramsci to turn against Gramsci. And one of the people they found who looked to see if he could have a career out of betraying those workers, that was Mussolini. And that's how Mussolini makes his decision to quit the Socialist Party and to join and set up a new thing and offer himself to the capitalists as a socialist they could work with, a socialist they could live with, a socialist who would not make the kind of moves or revolution that Gramsci did. And a very few years later, 2 years later, he takes power with the connivance of the banks and the capitalists who give him a blank check. He takes power, arrests Gramsci, puts him in jail for the rest of Gramsci's life.
All right, I want to go before that happens. Gramsci, after the strike is over and they get all, bent out of shape and crazy, the banks and the capitalists and the bourgeoisie, they hire these thugs that were wearing. That's why I'm trying to tie it into today with the black shirts. That was the incipient era right there, and then he does form Mussolini, the Fascist Party, and Gramsci and Fasta and the other ones, starts with a T. They formed the Communist Party, the PCI, and and then he goes into exile. But while he's in exile, he in 2024. He is named. He actually gets enough votes, whatever his proportional representation, and he's a member of the parliament. And that's we played that in the beginning. Is that speech that he gave? Now Mussolini had not made it full fascist yet in 2024. He'd been in power for 2 years since the march to Rome in 2022. He had 2 years, and then they had the elections. They kill Matteotti. He shows up. Everyone's walking on eggshells. Or glass, basically broken glass. Everyone's a little nervous. He shows up, and he gives the speech, and then he's arrested and booted into a miserable life. And this is what I want to get into: is that period of time. And I'm looking at me. I'm trying to draw the line. I said I would do this with what's going on in Minneapolis. The fact that he,
if you let me, very very briefly, when Mussolini moves into power, when the ruling class reacts in a desperate effort to knock off this Antonio Gramsci, whose success has so surprised and so frightened them, they understood that they could not rely on the police or even the military, because the police and the military were too close to the people. You know,
right?
The people who go to the factory at Fiat, they're the brother, the sister, the mother, the boyfriend, the girlfriend of the police people and of the military people. That you couldn't rely on them. If they were confronted with the workers, it wasn't clear which way they would go. They had to develop a core of their own military, a new military, composed of people that were fascistic in their mentality, that could be counted on to feel no sympathy, no empathy, to be tough guys who thought of themselves as macho if they could beat somebody up or punish somebody.
Like ICE.
Exactly. That's my point. Hitler developed them. They were called the Geheimstaatspolizei, whose first initials make Gestapo. That's what the Gestapo was. Yes, that's what ICE is, a whole new police force. There was no ICE 2 years ago. That was created in order to carry out not the expulsion of criminals who have no right to be in the country, immigrants. There's too few of them to make that necessary. That would be a joke. You created ICE because you knew and expected that you would be hassling large groups of people, that you would be hassling political enemies. That's what Hitler did with the Gestapo. That's what the Italians did with their black shirts.
And we're doing that now.
We in America, who don't know our history, of course, seem to be surprised that Mr. Trump is ending up going in the same direction, shooting Americans, shooting people who have nothing to do with immigration, who haven't committed any crime, and who are upset that their fellow citizens, whom they've come to know and appreciate, are being hassled for what? And when they ask that question, then they understand in a moment.
They're extremely aggressive, this ICE, and it's definitely a Trojan horse saying that they're going after immigrants that are criminals. That's not the real purpose. That's on the face of it. Am I correct? Would you concur with that?
They kill a nurse who volunteers. They kill that woman. Unbelievable.
Good.
There's now evidence that the fellow they killed, Preddy, had kicked in a headlight in one of their cars. If you even have the most minimal training imaginable, you train your police that if a person behaves in that way, you can arrest them, you can fine them. You don't shoot them. You don't wait for an opportunity to do a murderous revenge. What kind of a Well, the answer is they're not your regular police.
That's what Trump wants, though. Trump wants people like the Proud Boys in that position.
Yeah, that's what he's got.
And it's growing, and it's getting very scary. And because we only got 7 minutes left, I wanted this quote by him. I guess this is the period of time that we're living in. He said, and I don't know when he said this, if he was in prison at the time or 1921. He says, "The old world, you know what I'm going to say. The old world is dying, and the new world is struggling to be born. Now is the time of monsters." Is that what's going on right now? That interregnum. Tell us what interregnum is.
And I'll tell you what the old world is the dominance of the United States. We came out of World War II, the only country that wasn't wrecked, only major industrial country that wasn't wrecked by the war. Germany and Japan bombed to smithereens. France, England, Italy, pretty much the same. Russia, even worse. One country, other than Pearl Harbor, no bombs fell here. No factory was destroyed. No railroad was bombed. In those other countries, look at the pictures if you don't know. Look at the photographs. You'll see right away. They all looked like Gaza looks in the pictures we see now. Bombed out of recognition. But we emerged top of the hill. The dollar became the global currency. The United States dominated the 7 seas. We have leaders who still think we're in that situation, but they're not. They're like that cartoon fellow that you see in the movies, the cartoon character who runs off the edge of the cliff.
Yeah, right. Wile E. Coyote, I think.
Yes, and then he looks down and realizes, oh my goodness, there's nothing there, and boom, he falls. That's us.
Yeah.
We just went through a nation. We went through, the whole world is watching that the United States can't do it anymore. We lost the war in Vietnam. We lost the war in Afghanistan. We are losing the war in Ukraine. How many of these do you need before the brain begins to understand what's happening?
Right. So these were all
understood it. We should have understood it. We didn't. Now we're confronting it. But we just had a presidential election last November. And what did it show us? Neither Biden, nor Harris, nor Trump ever said a word about a declining empire. The whole rest of the world is talking about it. We're not talking about it because we're practicing denial. And that's what Gramsci meant. The old world is over. The new world hasn't taken a form. So people are busy denying that the old one is gone because they're scared to face that we're in for big changes.
Big monsters, and the monster seems to be
we elected one of them.
Right, but seems like his head is floating around in Minnesota. All right, rearing its ugly head in Minnesota right now, and I expect it to be. We got 2 minutes. How do we fight against this right now? That's going to have to be for another time because I wanted to talk about cultural. In 2 minutes, can you talk about cultural hegemony in the next 3 minutes?
Take a look, which I urge people to do. If you use Google or whatever you use. Check into the different kinds of groups that came together in Minneapolis and called a general strike. What an amazing thing. And they've had some history. They had strikes a year ago about issues in that community, and they got together. They have learned, whether you're in the religious community or you're in the union movement or you're the civic group or you're in civil rights or you fight against sexism, you have a common interest here. You're all in trouble given the way this country is working, and they got together. 700 businesses shut down Friday or the 23rd of January. Wow. Today is another day.
A national strike. And,
we didn't... Don't work, don't go to school, don't shop.
Right.
These These movements are mass movements. Only a culture of a certain kind can give people the idea, the feeling, and the courage to do it. And we just saw middle Americans right in the middle of our country, can't be more middle than Minneapolis, doing this. My hat is off. Everything else I have is off in honor of what those people have shown us. And already all over the country, people in many, many other cities, large and small, are asking themselves whether and how they can do it. And that itself, whatever their answer might be, is itself a step forward.
Right. So this national labor strike, we're going to be going to Minnesota at the top of the hour, and also to Venezuela to get reports from Craig Murray and former FBI officer and whistleblower Colleen Rowley, and somebody who was arrested yesterday. Will be devoting the second hour on all of this. Richard Wolff, I guess we didn't get to talk about cultural hegemony, but we're going to have to. You're gonna have to return, because there's so many things we went through that timeline and it went by so quickly, and there's a lot more to know about Gramsci and what
Let me also compliment you, Randy. It is really valuable that this history, so poorly understood around the world and especially in the United States, that you bring it back, show what it was, and help people see, not that it's difficult, the relevance to the kinds of questions and situations we face now.
Right. Listen, I thank you because, since we started the Marx series, and before that, the series on the Weimar Republic, that three-part series, I've had to work and study as I'm reading everything now, and I'm so much the wiser. I listen to classical music. I just try not to be on my cell phone. And imagine if Gramsci had a cell phone back then, how little he would have gotten done.
I've spent 25, 30 years, most of which I taught almost every year, a course called The History of the Marxian Tradition.
Right.
And I take people through Rosa Luxemburg, Gramsci, Lukács, Althusser, and many, many more. This is a tradition that developed enormous literary insights, political insights, economic insights that have changed the world and that are important all over the world, except in the United States, where you have to search long and hard to find anything like it. And I can tell you from many years that my classes, usually somewhere between 30 and 100 people, have been electrified by what they read and what they learned. And it has been useful to them in all the different disciplines in any university.
Well, I got to tell you, my life is so much better since we started doing these series. It's I'm reading a lot more and I'm learning a lot more, and it's such a pleasure to have you, Dr. Richard Wolff. We'll be talking to you. You'll be back in the next couple of weeks because there's a lot more to talk about.
Well, you wonder why I always dress in black, why you never see bright colors on my back, and why does my appearance seem to have a somber tone? Well, there's a reason for the things that I have on. I wear the black for the poor and the beaten down, living in the hopeless, hungry side of town. I wear it for the prisoner who has long paid for his crime, but is there because he's a victim of the time. I wear the black for those who've never read or listened to the words that Jesus said about the road to happiness through love and charity. Why, you think he's talking straight to you and me? Well, we're doing mighty fine, I do suppose, in our streak of lightning cars and fancy clothes. But just so we're reminded of the ones who are held back, up front there ought to be be a man in black. I wear it for the sick and lonely old, for the reckless ones whose bad trip left them cold. I wear the blackened mourning for the lives that could have been. Each week we lose